And when you buy bread from the store, you're probably getting a lot of sugar and you're getting commercially manufactured yeast. Yeast in sourdough is literally flour and water. That is all it is. So you take flour and you mix it with water and you let it ferment and you keep adding more. Then you when you get flour and water, you get what's called starter or levain, and you keep adding flour and water to it and you're building up your levain, and the bubbles that are in it are the fermentation, and that's the lactobacillic acid, and that is what makes sourdough very healthy for you. So if you are gluten intolerant, not celiac, but gluten intolerant, or bread makes you feel, stuffed or whatever, the same will not be true of sourdough. It's highly digestible and it helps you digest other foods. So it's actually a healthy bread for you to eat. I have always loved sourdough. I don't know why or how it started, but I just love sourdough. My first trip to San Francisco, I was in the bakeries. I was at the airport bringing home loaves of sourdough. I couldn't get enough of it. And I didn't know why I liked it so much, because I was one of those people that when I ate bread, I'm like, ugh, I don't, didn't sit that well, even though I loved it. But I loved the sourness of sourdough. So it started there. And then I actually have a friend in my town who is a home baker, and he makes lots of sourdough bread. And I would always be at his house watching him make it and shape it. And it was very interesting. But again, it's one of those things I thought I could never learn how to do because it was very technical. And but I had made bread for my kids out of a bread machine. So I liked fresh bread. So I said, could I get some starter from you? And he said, sure. So I came home and I got out my bread machine and I followed a sourdough recipe, and voila, I had sourdough bread. And my friend Amit came over and he said, yep, it's bread. Like, okay, you've achieved making bread, but that's not, you're not an artisan bread maker. So then he turned me on to this guy called Jim Lahey, Lahey. Jim Lahey has a recipe for sourdough called Jim's Lahey's No Knead Bread. So it's the easiest process to follow, that you literally do not knead the bread. You let it ferment and bulk ferment overnight. You come back the next morning and you bake it. Very easy. It was a beautiful loaf of bread, no scoring, no nothing. It was very, very easy to follow. So I did that a couple times. I'm like, okay, I can make good bread. So then I started looking at people on Instagram, and I found this one woman called Foolproof Baking. And she has on Instagram very simple tutorials on how to make a starter, on how to build a bread dough, and how to get, for a sourdough baker, what we call the crumb is everything inside the crust. And what you're trying to do as a bread maker is not get holes, because those are air bubbles, but get open small holes evenly throughout the entire piece of bread. If you cut a piece of bread, you want even holes all the way to the crust. And she taught some of the processes in which to get that open crumb. So I started following her and got a lot of knowledge on what adding more water will do, on different flours, because different flours have different levels of protein. Different levels of protein require different amounts of water or hydration. So I learned a lot of that from her. And then I found a bread maker. He's an Irish bread maker called Patrick Ryan. And he has a sourdough masterclass. And he goes from start to finish how to make bread, and how to follow recipes, and how to measure your ingredients. And I followed him for the longest time. And I started playing with his recipe. Because I think what happens is people start trying to make sourdough, and they'll go from one recipe to another, and they don't understand why their outcomes are different. So what I would suggest for anybody is to make sure that you follow one recipe, find the one recipe that makes you comfortable, modify that recipe so you see what happens when you modify it before you move on to another recipe. One of the things that Foolproof Baking taught, so when you're making sourdough bread, you're trying to build up the glutens in the dough. When you first mix the dough, which you can do it in a commercial, electric mixer, you can do it by hand. You're trying to take that flour, water, and starter and make the dough strong and stretchy. So that elasticness of it is building glutens. And there are a couple different ways to do it. One is you fold the bread like an envelope and you turn it over. Another way is what they call lamination, which you spread the dough out on your counter. You sort of are pulling it apart and stretching the dough. It's also this process called lamination is also a good way if you're going to put anything in your bread like cinnamon and raisins or nuts, whatever. That is the best time to do it because it fully incorporates your ingredients throughout the bread dough. So Foolproof Baking goes on to talk about lamination and how to fold. And then we want to talk about a starter. So again, I mentioned the starter this is a starter that is in process. The reason I have a rubber band is because I am monitoring the process, the fermentation of my starter. So I know that I started here and I know that it's already grown to here. So when I know it's mature and ready to use, it will have grown 3 times. So I look for that. And the simple thing is to use a rubber band. So you can either start your own starter, which you can go to Foolproof Baking, and she has a whole way to how to start a starter. You can go to a bakery and ask them; they'll usually give it to you for free, or you can ask another sourdough baker. We have plenty of starter because we're always discarding starter. Once we're growing it, we discard it, we grow it, we discard it. So there's always plenty of starter around. You want to make sure that when you're using your starter, you want it to be mature. So if you are a regular baker, you want to leave your starter out on the counter and you want to feed it twice a day. If you are not a regular baker and you want to leave your starter in the refrigerator, you can do so for up to a week or 2 without feeding it. You'll want to, even if you're just going to leave it in the refrigerator for a month, you're going to want to feed it every week or 2, which is to bring it out, give it more flour, water. And it's usually 1 to 1 to 1. So you use 1 part starter, 1 part flour, 1 part water. So if you use 50 grams of starter, it's 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. You stir that together, that's feeding your starter. If you want to use your starter from the refrigerator, you want to take it out and you want to feed it 3 times. So let's say night, morning, night, so it's ready to go back in the morning. I like to feed my final starter at night if I'm going to bake the next day, because it takes about 12 hours to get to grow to maturity. So I feed it the last time at night and then leave it out on my counter and it's ready to bake first thing in the morning. There's a big section too on ratios of feeding. What I just told you is a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. And that takes about, as I said, 6 to 10, 12 hours, depending on the heat of your house. But if you want, let's say I have 100 grams of starter and I need 400 grams for a recipe, I can take my starter and feed it 1 to 3 to 3. So I can do 100 grams of starter, 300 grams of flour, 300 grams of water, and then I will have the 400 grams that I need. So it's very flexible how you want to feed it. Some people use rye in their starter. Some people keep multiple starters, 1 all white, 1 rye, whatever you want to do. I was keeping 2 starters. Now I keep 1 white starter. And if I want a little sourness from the rye, I'll add it to the dough. Okay. Also, people have said to name your starter. So when I was doing the Age of Conversation with Liz and Nicole last time, they said, let's call it Bread Pit. So it's Bread Pit. Okay, so we have our starter and now we want to make bread. Okay, so as I said, you can either use a mixer. That first mix can either be, you know, a KitchenAid mixer, or you can mix it by hand. I have tried both. I don't see any benefit of mixing it by hand, except for you get good, you get good muscles. But I put mine in the KitchenAid mixer. I put all the ingredients together. I mix it for about 10 minutes. I start on the first speed just so the flour doesn't go flying. And then I mix it for 10 minutes. I bring it out and I put it in, put the dough in a container that looks like this. So this is actually baguette dough that's getting ready to shape. You can see the quantity of dough that I have. So it's a Rubbermaid container. This is what I use to do what we call the bulk fermentation. So it's the first, after it's been mixed, it's the first process, it's the first step in making bread. And it is the process by which you are developing those glutens. So this is where I will mix it, put it into that bulk container. Then I will let it rest for 45 minutes. And then I will come in and I will actually fold the dough. So I lift it up, fold it, fold it, fold it, and fold it. Let it rest 45 minutes again. 45 minutes later, I come back and I do the lamination. So I spread it out on my counter, on a wet counter, and I pull the dough out. This is all explained on Foolproof Baking. So if you really want to see the videos of this, how this is done, Foolproof Baking. We'll show you step by step how to do this. And then after we want to talk about temperature. So about 75 degrees is the temperature by which you want to do the bulk fermentation. There are machines that you can buy, Broad and Taylor, B-R-O-D, and Taylor is one of those. It's a proofing machine. It can keep it at a constant temperature of 75 degrees. You can put it in, you can turn your light on in your oven and then put the container in and then turn your light off. It all depends on what your oven, how many lights you have in your oven. My oven has too many lights, it gets too hot. So I turn the light on, get it warm, then put the bread in there. And I have, this is a thermometer that I use, and I can gauge, it's ultra, and I can tell, okay, right now my room is 68 degrees. My dough just came out of the refrigerator. I pointed at my dough, so I can see what my dough temperature is at all times. Usually it takes about 6 hours in bulk fermentation at 75 degrees. And that, again, see, I don't want to give you too much information because I don't want it to be overload, but depending on how much levain you use in your dough will depend how long you bulk ferment and the temperature at which you're bulk fermenting. So sometimes in the summer, things go faster because it's hotter in your house. In the winter, when it's colder, sometimes it can take more time. So you'll start to learn what your dough looks like. It should increase in size by about 30%. So I have a piece of tape. I don't know if you can see this. I have a piece of tape on my bulk container right here. And I know that my dough started here. And this has now, you can see that it has increased in bulk by 30%. So I know my dough is ready. I can also, what's really ready, I can also pick up my dough and see that it holds together well, and I can stretch it and get like what's called a window pane, so I can see through it and it's not ripping. See how strong that is? And I can make it thin and it's not gonna rip. I mean, I can make it rip like I just did, but that's what you're looking for to make sure that your dough is ready. So once you finish bulk fermentation, you're going to want to pre-shape your dough. So in the pre-shape, what you're doing, everybody loves really good crust. And the way to get really good crust is to create tension on the outside of your dough. So you want to take your dough, and if you're making one loaf, you want to take your dough, you want to take it out of the container, and you want to use a bench scraper or a bowl scraper, and you want to start moving the dough into a circular pattern. So you're pushing up on the dough and then you're pushing it around. So you're creating a ball. You can do it with your hands. You can pull it towards you. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Patrick Ryan will show you one of the ways to do it. And you're creating tension on the outside of your dough. You're just doing, it's called pre-shape because you're just giving it a little shaping, a little tension, because you don't want to start tearing your dough. So you let it sit for a certain period of time, and it depends on if you've over bulked, you don't want to let it sit too long. If you've bulked for the exact right amount, and you know, we're always moving around, we have schedules. Sometimes I've left it too long, like that's bulked too much because I had to go do something. I will let it pre-shape for less time, but I just want it from 10 to 30 minutes. I want to let it sit on the counter pre-shaped. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to take my scraper and I am going to then really pull it towards me. I'm going to really shape it and get it so that you don't want to rip it, but it's very gently. You want to build a lot of tension on the outside of that dough. And then you want to flour it. You want to put a little flour on top of it. And you want to put it into what is called a banneton basket. And these are linen lined baskets that you can get on Amazon. Some are wicker, some are willow. These happen to be rattan willow. And they have the little liners. You can do it with the liner, or you can take the liner out. I don't know if you've seen artisan bread where it has a design at the bottom of it. That's achieved from the basket. So you can do that either way. And you put it in the basket. And then what I do is I cover it with a towel. And then I use a shower cap. I cover it with a towel. I put a shower cap over it. These shower caps are great for bread. They're great for keeping your bread fresh. Put it, towel, shower cap, and I put it in the refrigerator overnight. One thing about sourdough that it loves, I'm looking at the time, is it loves a slow fermentation process. The slower the process, the more sour your bread becomes. And it's also easier to score it. And I'll talk about scoring in a minute. But so I put it in the refrigerator overnight. In the morning, I come in and I bake in these Dutch ovens. These Dutch ovens are the greatest. I don't know anybody in their home who had a steam oven. And bread, when it's in the oven, we call it oven spring. It needs steam for the first 30 minutes to really grow and grow. So to pretend that I have steam, I actually start with my Dutch ovens in the oven at 500 degrees, empty, for 30 minutes. That gets them nice and hot, and it lets the steam build up. And then I put my bread into the oven. So I have a pizza peel that I put on top of mine. I should have had the pizza peel out, and I don't. Right here. So when I'm ready to put this in the oven, I take my banneton basket. I put some parchment paper on top, take my plastic off, put my parchment paper on top, flip it over, and then I have the top of the dough exposed. And I need to do what's called scoring. If you don't score your dough, and that's putting the cuts in the dough, if you don't score your dough will find an escape on its own, and it will tear wherever it wants to. So you don't want to do that. This is my scoring of a Christmas tree. So those are the little, so you take what's called a lame, and it is a blade that you can either buy like this, or you can make your own lame if you have access to a razor. And this is actually a Starbucks coffee stirrer that I just put through. So you can make your own. This is an eyeglasses case that I keep it in. But you use that to cut into your bread. And so you can do it in a design. You can just do slits in it. You want to do it about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deep, because you want to let your bread expand, and it's what creates the design on top of your bread. So after you have scored your bread, then you're ready to put it in the oven. So you've taken the Banneton basket off, you've got your dough up, you've got it scored, and now you're ready to put it, you've got your parchment paper on the bottom. So remember I said put the parchment paper on the top of the basket. You pull your parchment paper and pull it into the pot. You bake it with the lid on for 30 minutes at 500 degrees. After 30 minutes, you take the lid off to let the steam escape. And then you bake it for an additional 20 minutes at 450 degrees. And you'll get this nice golden color. There are some bakers that like their bread more burned. They think the darker it is, the better flavor. I choose this caramel color. You kind of see a bunch of, like it's a 3-tone. And you know it's done when you tap the bottom and you hear, you can hear it, or you can put a thermometer into it. If you don't have a Dutch oven, there are other ways to simulate steam. You can put a cast iron pan with ice cubes in the oven right before you're getting ready to put the bread in, and then pour boiling water over it. Put that in. You can use lava rocks. You can use what they call a sylvie, which is a wet terry cloth towel in a bread pan that the steam comes out of the towel. So there are many ways to simulate steam, but the steam is very important. And then after the 30 minutes, you have to remove the sylvie or remove the lava rocks because you want to remove the steam. I guess the best part about making sourdough bread is the satisfaction that you have accomplished making the bread that makes you and your family happy. So I find a lot of satisfaction in making my bread and making all different kinds of bread. I am now making scones and sourdough English muffins and pretzels and bagels. And I've done a lot of different varieties of bread I've tried einkorn flour, rye, kamut. I start playing with flour now. I forgot to mention something very important, and that is baker's measurement. It's really important to know in your recipe what you prefer for your measurements. If flour is 100%, everything else is a percentage of that. Like usually salt is 2 to 2.5%. Levain is 20 to 30%. If I'm mixing flours, I'll mix 20% of the rye, but then 80% will be the bread flour. And I mix water. If you want the more advanced bakers, go with higher hydration. It's very difficult to deal with at a higher hydration. That's why more advanced bakers do it. If you want to start, you should start like 60, 65%. Hydration is much easier to deal with the dough. One of the tricks in handling dough is wet your hands with cold water. That will keep the dough from sticking. So I'll turn it over to you guys and see if you have any questions. I would love to do these kind of virtual events for you event planners. I'm from the event industry. I've been in the event industry for 25 years. I've been head of business development for many agencies. I think my career path is leading me here. I'm hoping. So I'll open the floor to you guys.
So Tracy, first off, that I can tell that you're very passionate and that sourdough making is not for the faint of heart. So what would you, if you had more time, how does this translate to like a live class? Because I see that we probably just couldn't make it, in an hour, but
Correct.
You foresee yourself being able to, after you kind of taught us how sourdough works, how it's different, how it's healthier, how you could allow us as participants to perhaps bake, or is that just not possible because of the intricacy of sourdough?
I can do online classes, but having somebody do it alongside me is more difficult because of the hours that it takes. So it's probably 7 hours in my single day.
Okay.
Just through the bulk fermentation. So
Right.
What we could do is do a Jim Lahey no knead and tell people what to do the night before, and then maybe do it together once it's already ready to bake, how to score, and then put it in the oven. So we could do
Okay.
that. We could do the night before, just an easier version. I would start with a Jim Leahy no knead bread.
I see. Okay.
Maybe we could tell people it's really easy. So give people the ingredients are flour, water, salt, by the way. I think something that everybody has, whether you have all-purpose flour or bread flour, it doesn't really matter. So we could do that. We could send out recipes to make it the night before and then talk about what it looks like. And yeah.
Okay. Josie, did you have a question?
Yes, I have, number one, I have the first comment is your kitchen's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
I was sitting here and when you opened up that refrigerator door, I went, oh, that's just gorgeous. But Tracy, I'm on the other end where I'm doing cooking, and I totally understand what you're saying because Renell, is it Renell?
Renell.
Renell, I was wondering how you're going to do your demo when you only have a certain amount of time. And I know when I'm editing my videos, my meal might take over an hour, but I'm editing it down to 10 or no more than 15 minutes because people don't have that attention span.
Right.
So they're not going to do that. But yeah, it's interesting that I just wanted to comment, number one about your kitchen, but about the bread. And I'm sitting here because my husband loves sourdough bread. I just don't have the patience to be a baker. So, I grew up with a family of bakers, but I'm the cook.
Well, I can't wait to join your session. What are you going to demo?
And Carrie Abernathy, I was listening to her this morning and I just texted her and she goes, have you ever on my YouTube station done pasta carbonara? And I was going to do, because it's quick, I have 30 minutes, I can do pot linguine with white clam sauce, but I figured out I can do the carbonara in 30 minutes. So I told her I was going to do it. So I have to run out to the store and get some pancetta.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yum.
That's exciting.
Well, we are out of time. Tracy, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Renell, and thank you everybody for joining.
And yes, your kitchen is beautiful.
Thank you. Well, sign me up to do some sort of virtual classes. Did you, just one question, do you think from this session that I took some of the mystery out of sourdough?
Well, for me, I didn't realize that it was healthier for gut health. So I think, yes, it was very informative, but for me, I'm thinking, wow, I don't have the patience. So I would I would love for someone to give me like my dough already, and then I get to shape and get it ready and put it in the oven.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be perfect for me.
Well, I have a micro bakery in my house. So I sell out of my house. People pick up their bread on the front porch.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's
so
wonderful.
That has been awesome. I've been doing that since March. So
Yeah.
that has been great because people don't want to, they were trying to make it themselves, but now they just buy it on my front porch.
And you can tell that you're really passionate and you love what you're doing. So that I'm really glad that you're able to monetize that. That's wonderful.
And I just subscribed. I just started following you on your Instagram page.
Oh, good. My Instagram is TT_Harte, HARTE. For anybody that wants to follow, and you can see the breads I make. You can, send me questions.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people that I follow. This one woman, Sourdough Sophia out of London, just came out with a book. She's doing some online classes as well. So there's a lot of resources that are great if you really are interested. I'll probably be doing a book pretty soon. Funny with Sourdough Sophia, when I saw her book, I'm like, you have my outline. Your book is my outline. So.
Well, thank you very much. We are going to go. We're going to, if you'd like to stay in the room, we're going to hear from Mr. DJ. And you can unmute, Rob.
Yes, I got to put my headset on.